All right.
All right, we are going to now review Laserfiche Forms. Laserfiche Forms is launched either from the Start menu, All Programs, Laserfiche, or it might be on the desktop. We'll go into Forms, and we can go into Forms. Now, there is a configuration side to Laserfiche. Assuming that's all set up, we can then just jump into Forms. I will show some of the items in the configuration, but let's go ahead and launch Laserfiche Forms, which is browser-based.
Okay, so is the difference like Forms is when it's already built, and then configuration is for building like the template to your forms, or
no,
that
actually,
how that works? Or?
The configuration is some of the basic information about where the Forms database is and email servers in use. Forms itself.
Okay, so it's more technical. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. So the configuration is much more technical and not something you'd normally have to even mess with after it's all set up. Forms itself, once you've logged in, has a administrative mode, which allows us to set certain things and design e-forms and the processes that it may have. Or some users, because they're not necessarily system administrators or even anybody who does anything but interacts with forms, then they might either log into Forms or use a form and just use the e-forms and nothing else. So we'll go over all that.
Okay.
So let's log in as an admin here. Actually, I'm probably logging in not with the right one. Let's use our correct password. And it's just, again, running, as we can see up here. This is a demo system, so I use an account called Forms, which we typically create for our end users as well. So usually there's an account called Forms that is the master account, so to speak, for Forms initially, and then maybe they can change it or whatnot, but it's usually what we set up for them. So here is Laserfiche Forms. The Forms product allows us to interact with e-forms that have been sent to us, and you might see them listed in the My Tasks area. And if you have anything that's ongoing that you might have worked on, you might have open drafts or incomplete e-forms, right? You might start filling out a form, but it's not complete, and you said, hey, I need to come back to this. Well, they would be listed in drafts. And then you also have My History, which would show you some forms that you had either completed or might be, in progress, but that's not necessarily completed on somebody else's side. So this form approval process is in progress because somebody else is not taking action. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that. That just means that you started this form, it's in progress, and at some point it will complete.
Okay.
Involving Me also shows you some other workflow forms that are in process possibly that might be in there, but that's it. So that's your history, and that's this little 3 lines here is the menu. Some people even call it the hamburger because it kind of looks like pieces of bread with a piece of meat there. Anyway, that's the menu. So that's your typical screen that you would get shown as an end user. If you are an end user and not an administrator type, you may not see the Processes tab up here. You might just see Tasks and My Reports. So an end user will see Tasks. They will also see My Reports. And if you click on that, there should be typically a report or two that they can look at. They might relate to all the forms that they are allowed to see. Maybe they need to see what's going on with expense reimbursements that have been suspended for lack of action, or let me see, weekly list of completed expense reimbursements. These reports can all be built by the administrator and then provided to end users or themselves for use. So if we want to look at one, just click on it, and that comes up and gives you a display, and in this case there are none because it's a demo system. I rarely do anything on here, but there you go. So you can take a look at reports. In fact, if I click on that, We can edit that report, as you can see here, and you can change some of the users who can see the report, as you can see here. Just type in a username of somebody who is in the Forms system or actually in the Laserfiche admin console. So all these users, in order to use Forms, typically need to be users in the repository. So if you go into the administration console, you need
So
to,
would they do something public-facing through here as well, or and just have to tweak the permission set or something, or how would that work?
so there are a couple flavors of Laserfiche Forms. And the basic one is Forms, and your user accounts here like Forms, my name, Bob, whatever it may be. That would be available for use in Forms by internal users, those who are on the
Okay, so like an HR department distributing, in bulk
Right.
to the company or something like that. Okay.
Right. So you could have forms that are available to, Laserfiche users who are in the company network, or second of three is a authenticated user, as they call it, one who you have set up in Forms with you basically allow them to use their email address and a password that they have created in order to log into Forms and interact with it. So that's authenticated users. And it doesn't relate to the Laserfiche accounts. It's kind of a separate authentication method.
Okay.
And then thirdly is the public portal type license, where it allows unlimited numbers of anonymous users to come to the Forms site, which is usually outside the company network and being hit as a regular website, so that people can fill out things like a job application or requests for information, things like that. So any public-facing type Forms situations would be licensed with a public portal license.
And then does that pull the metadata that they're filling out and integrate it into their system, their Laserfiche system or CRM? Or?
Yes, we can, and we'll go through that. We'll design a form and we'll bring it and show it how it goes from Laserfiche Forms, which Forms can be its own environment, by the way. Forms can, except for the usernames, maybe, if they're Laserfiche users that are, and you don't have the public portal license, for example, or authenticated users in place, which they actually call participant licensing. So there's three models, right? There's basic Forms, which does require a Laserfiche username, which takes up just user licenses in general. The second one is participant licensing, which allows users to log into Forms with a provided email address and password combination. And thirdly is that public portal, which allows anonymous users to just hit a form, fill it out, hit submit, and then it pushes that form into wherever it needs to go in the form system. So those are the three licensing models. I'll let Patrick explain more of those if you have any questions, but that should cover it at least for now. But yes, forms, once they're submitted, that information on that form can be used to be pushed into a external SQL database, or it can be pushed into Laserfiche as a form itself, along with that metadata to trigger workflows and things like that. So we'll go over that here shortly, but I just wanted to show you a couple areas here in general. So, and users internally, if they have a need to go to Forms, they can come here. They might get notifications, and they might see Forms emails coming to them, and they might never even have to come here to their tasks area. But it just depends on how it's set up, and we'll cover that scenario. And then finally, as an admin, we're logged in with the Forms account, which is more a system administrator account. We can go look at the available Forms processes. And Laserfiche calls them a process because it's typically a business process. You fill out the form, and then it goes to somebody else who has to do some more steps, and then somebody else maybe has to do some approvals. So that e-form starts things off, but it's part of an overall flow of information, and therefore
so it's like the beginning of a workflow, basically.
Exactly, yes. So they just call it a business process instead of calling it workflow, because they've already called something else workflow. But there you go. So we can create a new process from scratch. We can open up existing processes, all of that as an admin from the Processes tab. Why don't we do that really quickly here? Let's take a look at expense reimbursement. It's a fairly straightforward and well-known process. And in Forms, we have this ability to edit certain parts of the whole environment. So when you first create a form, it has a process diagram. It could be very simple, could be complex steps, who knows. It has the e-forms that are capturing the information. Somebody's filling out that name and address and phone number and date that they went wherever and how much it costs, etc. That's all the e-forms area. Access rights relates to who can see this particular process and submit a form or even view it. And then publishing means turning it on and making it available to the users who you expect it to use, because until you publish it, it's kind of hidden from anybody but yourself.
So just like publishing a workflow then?
Right, exactly.
Where it's not going like, okay.
So the first thing is we'll go ahead and edit on the expense reimbursement. Let's go ahead and look at the form itself, the e-form. So we'll click on that, let it come up, and we'll take a look at what it looks like. And it's a really neat web-based, what you see is what you get, graphical user interface. You have different fields. As you can see, as I roll my cursor over them, it kind of highlights it. You can kind of barely see this yellowish tint on that. Next one is department, next one phone number. And all these fields are basically selected from the left-hand side, from the list of fields. And any type of field that you need, you can simply click and drag and place it onto the form and then release. That allows you to then configure additional settings on this particular field. And you do have to scroll down, but you have this kind of status bar here, done, duplicate, or delete. But initially, as you drop all these fields onto the form as you're building it out, you can give it a name. In this case, it kind of defaults to what it is, but it really might not be what you eventually are going to call it. We'll leave it as radio button here. We can allow it to create a variable name, which comes into play later on. We'll leave that alone for now. As you can see, you can make these fields required or read-only. You can even add text above or below the field for additional information to help users fill out that field. You can set the layout for certain fields. The layout might be important, especially for lists, or, well, not lists, but a radio or checkbox configuration. You want, if you have an even number of them, maybe you want to have 2 columns so that you have, let's say, 4 items and 2 in each column, whatever you want. So you can kind of customize your layout. We can do side by side. And then here you can customize, kind of like editing your list in the admin console for a list field. You can do the same here. Put in your choices. You can even put the other choice in there as well. And if your choices, or whatever the variables are, the values here, you might even sometimes want to assign for choice 1, number 1, choice 2 is 5, and choice 3 is 10, which if you potentially are trying to do some calculations and do some fancy logic, this might be useful to add values to the choices so that you can say, well, if I've got, you know, it's a checkbox and I've got 2 choices and they total up 15, then I know that was not choice 1, but choices 2 and 3, something like that. I mean, who knows? There are certain situations where this is handy, and that's why Laserfiche does provide that, but I'm not going to do that here. So basically, that's the basic steps. There is an advanced tab right here, and you can add helpful hints. This is kind of like when you roll over the question mark, it will tell you what to do.
Oh, okay.
So when they are looking at that, they can actually roll over the question mark and it'll tell them something about that field. CSS class relates to some programming. We'll get to that later, but you can give a name here if you need it so that you can reference this field with your code. So that's what that's there for. So otherwise, we're done. We'll click OK. And you can see, here's the help button. that should actually have a, well, doesn't have it right now, but as you can see, we did side by side. So we have choice 1, 2, and 3 as well as other in our field. Now, at this point, we can still move it around and things like that.
That's cool.
And then if we are kind of at the point where we think, okay, I like what I've got here, and we've added some additional fields, we have a table here as well. Forms provides us tables. And it's got a row here of a few fields: date, vendor, purpose, amount, receipts, and billing code. The red stars indicate that it's a required field. But notice, because it's a table, we have this little add button, and you can add additional lines as you are filling out this form to say, okay, well, on this date I used a taxi, and it was this much. On this date I used, I bought dinner, and it was this much, and here's the receipts, etc. So you can continually add items in a table. And what's really neat is on this one, I think it's possibly in the advanced area. No, I think it's in the code. I'll show you. It's actually taking the amount and totaling it up in this field for us. Down below, we also have the signature field, which allows us to get somebody to sign the form. We can get automatic today's date populated. That is if we edit that field, you can populate the default value with today's date. Down here, if we look, we can actually insert for certain fields, you can actually get tokens, one of them being today's date. So the date token says, hey, populate today's date in there, or if we go down here, maybe date incurred or instant start date or whatever you want to do as far as that. Today is actually today's date. That's the token we would use in this case if we just wanted today's date, which we've already done. So let's say you've built out this form. You're pretty happy with the way it looks. You don't want to publish it yet, but you want to see what it looks like. Come up to the top right and click on the preview icon. Little eyeball, little Egyptian eye, so to speak. And that launches another tab. And that'll show us what it looks like. All right, so we're in preview mode. So entering the data, no big deal. You can select some information, make your choice, and then, put in the date that the expense occurred, blah, 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 $45. We don't do billing codes. But notice I typed in 45 in the amount. The total reimbursement is now keeping that running total. So let's add another line item like we're going to do, and then we'll do that, and let's add $10 for that item. And now if I click anywhere else, it's added that $10 to the total. So functionality that you can build in is really cool. The sign functionality allows you to either draw, if you've got a tablet or a phone, this is really handy. But if you don't, you can put in your name and then choose your style of signature of those three choices there. And then that'll sign that and put that on the form.
Awesome.
Yep, pretty straightforward, very easy to use. And then at the very end, you're provided with a submit button. So the end user says, okay, I've filled it out. And notice up at the top, I logged in as forms and I get my name pre-populated in here. So depending on your users, you can get that name populated, etc. You can even, so a lot of information can be pre-populated based on something. The neat thing is, like we were mentioning, forms can do lookups into SQL or SQL databases, and say, based on a name, fill out their phone number, their department, their email address, etc. So you can make these forms a lot easier for somebody to fill out than just, hey, you got to fill this out. So pretty neat. So we'll go ahead and fill it, submit it, which I can't do that. Plus it needs to, I have to upload receipts. So upload receipts is pretty straightforward. Just upload your file. There you go. You're good to go. Obviously, we're in preview mode, so none of this is actually going to let us do anything. But if you don't fill out a required field or do something, as you could see, it warns you. So very
Yep.
interactive type product, and we love it for that. All of the fields down here, we can go through. Most of them are self-explanatory. The first few make more sense than anything else. Single line as opposed to multi-line. Radio buttons, checkboxes, and drop-downs, file uploads. We just saw all those examples. An address field, if you add that in, actually comes pre-populated with, if it will drop it in there, all the usual fields for an address: street 1 and 2, city, state, zip, and country. So you don't have to make individual fields. It does this all for you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this, so I'm going to hit delete. Number fields are useful for, let me do that again. There we go. We can do number fields with decimal places. You can use a thousands delimiter. That did not exist in previous versions, so the newest version of Forms, it will have this ability to actually, for numbers, use a comma in there. Even if you type in 1000 like that, it'll actually make it appear with the comma after the 1.
Mm-hmm.
Really handy. You can set your decimal places if you want, and go ahead and preview that. So some really neat things in that regard. Where did I put it? Let's go back to the form. Oh, I didn't hit done. That's why. And it was, I didn't even add it, did I? So there we go. Let's put it right there. That's our number. Oh, that was our default value. We can allow ranges of numbers, etc. So pretty fun. Let's go click done on that. Preview. And there's our number field. I'll go there and notice it formats the field with a comma and decimals.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty fun. Okay, so they all make sense. Currency is really fun. You can choose the type of currency, whether it's U.S. dollars or British pounds, whatever you need. Signature, we saw. Geolocation is really neat. It can actually, depending on if you're using a phone or a tablet with Wi-Fi or cellular connection, you can geotag where you might be taking pictures from, if that's important. For example, the city of Long Beach uses Laserfiche Forms to document tagging that's going on around in the neighborhood, and they use geolocation to get a spot map to map the spot, and therefore they use it with their GIS system or geographic information system to say, oh, here's where all those tags are, and here's the gang associated with it, so they can kind of get a really neat mapping system going. But kind of a neat thing. Custom HTML allows us to add text or images or various configurations of the form to make it look prettier. We can create sections. This expense list is a table, but it's also technically, this is a table, this line here, but the expenses is a section. And I think it could be, well, you know what, let's do that. Let's add a table. Let's go add that below here. Oh, okay. So it's just a table. You could add a section and put a table inside of it. Sections are kind of an area where you might consider collapsing it or hiding it until something else appears. So sections are very useful in that regard. And collections are the same thing, but they are reusable in the form. So you might say, I'm going to create a collection, put a signature and a date field in there, and then I'll reuse that collection in other parts of the form. So it kind of allows you to reuse information. And as we can see here, a collection, if we click on that link. It allows you to set a collection of fields for reuse. I'm not going to actually do that here, but there you go. So that's, kind of the basics of building a form. And we saw here that there's one. Let's look at some of the other information on the form itself, what might exist. Let's click on field rules. And there are no field rules, but let's build one and see how it works. Let's create a new one. And let's say we want to show a field only when a certain value is set. So in other words, it should be hidden initially, but then we're going to show it when something else is set. So the expenses, I'm not sure which one is which.
So like you enter an item and then it will finally display?
Correct, yeah. So let's say we choose department and it's department 3, we will show the expenses area. So when we make this field rule, so to speak, we have to save it, and then let's do a preview. So notice that whole table, the expenses table, we can't see it right now. But if we choose department 2, nope. Choose department 3, lo and behold, it shows up.
Got it.
So very fun, nice tool. Most of our clients go, ooh, that's so great.
Yeah, I mean, you can make some really nice form pages out of this.
Exactly. And the inverse would be, the inverse would be hide, and then, it would be available. And then if you were to say, oh, it is department 3, well, it disappears. Depending on
so can they change all the white space branding and labeling on it too, kind of like where the expense reimbursement form written out is? They can kind of tailor it, like say you're working with a county website, you can tailor it so it looks like their own landing page or landing form.
Absolutely.
Cool.
That's done with the themes area, and if you need to reconfigure the form.
Themes, header, and all that.
Exactly. You can, not only can you use some default themes, but then you can go to the Customize tab up here and go and say, you know what, I need a special logo. It's going to be, this size, and it's going to go here. I can change the background, and you can change all these different portions of the form. So you can get very granular as to how it looks. So yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Cool.
And when you've done that, you can then actually save that configuration as a custom theme.
Great.
Yeah. So then
that way you can kind of mimic it on
other
without
forms.
work. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's field rules and themes. The lookup rules, that is the information that we might find from a database. We need to make sure that there is a connection to a database or a database source already configured, which there seems to be here. So let's use this external tables link. And that allows us to look at some tables. And those tables might be, I don't know, a list of owners, doc types, clients, etc., whatever it might be. And so when one field with, I don't know, name matches owner, then we'll fill, I don't know, the email field with another value. So what do we got? Name is matches with owner, email field filled with the last name. What's the owner name? I don't know. Would have to look it up in the database, which I actually could do pretty quickly here if we were to look at that. External tables and the owner table in that database. Let's go ahead and do that real quick here, if you don't mind. If you've never seen this before, this is the Microsoft SQL Management Studio. We as consultants and trainers use this quite often for, we build databases. Remember on our training yesterday we were discussing dynamic fields where we might choose the year, make, and model. We would have to build a database to allow us to do that. So here's our external tables database right here. Here's our tables. And there was that owners table. We could do a quick view and say, hey, let's edit or view the top whatever rows. So here's a few, and we could choose owner. Let's choose the name Stan. We'll copy that. And it should bring back Abbott as the last name in that system. So with that set, we'll go ahead and save that. So that's our lookup rule. And if we go and do a preview, we're going to go into the name field. and put that name in there, which we need to replace that. Put that name in there. When we click in there, notice it filled out the other field with the value from the database.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of what lookup rules do. So we can do either we can make it a list, right? So we could say, hey, it's just going to be there's no well, we could do sorting, but we could because we can make this just a list. So we can do a fill email with last names from that source. So in other words, we can turn that into basically just a list. And that email gives us the list of names here instead. So you can reconfigure what you're doing with the form. That database might be able to provide you with a drop-down list, like we see here, or fill in other fields because you chose a value, or both. You could say, hey, I'm going to choose from the drop-down list, and when I do, fill out the other information from the database.
Got it.
So pretty neat stuff. I love doing this, and the customers just love being able to see how they can do it. And they take this and run with it. They see that, and they go, oh, I'm on my way. No need to show me anything else. I'm happy.
Yeah, it's got all the features and add-ons that they would want, so it's already pre-built very well.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's modern and user-friendly looking, so it looks great.
Totally. Therefore, they might need to do or get some help on CSS and JavaScript. This is where the coding comes in. How do you make it really pretty? How do you make it look this, that, and the other? This one has some built-in coding for CSS. One of the most common is inline block, which makes ID, let's see, Q16 and Q5, which would be department and where is it? Email. So the department field has an ID called Q16, as you can see here, and the email is Q5. So the inline block allows you to say, hey, display, 1 and 16, which would be the name and the department on one line, and show 4 and 5 on one line as well. So if you're looking at this on the form itself, this one, it's not doing that. I must have messed that up. Typically, we saw initially on the form that it was doing that for us.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason it's changed up, because when you're in the layout mode and you're adding fields, you don't have to save anything. It automatically saves those. Every place else that you make edits, field rules, lookup rules, themes, you have to save those changes. But notice there's no save button up here. So anytime you add information or change the layout, it automatically saves those changes when you're done. So that is kind of interesting. Let's go to our field rules and remove that, because I think that might have broken it. We'll go ahead and delete that whole rule. We'll go ahead and go back to our, let's hit, stay on this page, hit save, because we always have to save our changes, except for when you're in layout mode. And let's see what we get. So we're back to that. We'll do a preview. Well, at least it's doing department and phone number for us. I don't know why forms, I might have hidden something else out. So it's putting those two on that same line. So the inline block is making this happen for us. Otherwise, it'd all be kind of lined up vertically, and sometimes you don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. So that's kind of forms in a nutshell. That's at least the fun part of the eForm side of things. Now, along with that, and the submission is, kind of built into the form. What does this form do? Well, it's going to allow you to hit submit and all that. We can actually go into the form setting, and we can rename the form. We can tell it what kind of alignment for the labels it's going to have. So for example, we can say put the label on the top so it doesn't push everything over, it's on the top. Or if you set it for left, notice now the labels are on the left-hand side of the field.
Okay.
So depends on your layout needs. So those are some configurations you can do. And then if that's all good, we can then go back. We can go to the processes, or at this point we can hit the menu button and say, well, maybe once it's submitted I need to create a slightly different form and use that for the next person to use as their review process. Or you can go up to the process diagram, which is the quote, workflow part of it, and let's do that. So we'll go look at the process diagram for this submitted e-form. Give it a second here. My virtual machine is not the fastest, but we'll get there. All right, cool. So upon the initial submit, you have this starting message, so to speak. In fact, they call it that. And Laserfiche provides us with a bunch of templated, like sample workflows and forms and things like that, or in other words, processes. And it's really great because they actually give you the name, they give you the stages. These at the very top here, we see these columns. They call them stages. And if you've ever seen diagrams for process diagrams in a layout, this is called the swim lane in if you've ever heard of that term. But in this case, they're using standard, they call it standard business process notation or something like that. And these are stages or sections, as you want to call it. And these can be renamed, by the way. You can edit that and change the stage name. So what's really interesting is these stages can show up in your forms report to tell you how far along a form that has been submitted is within and what stage it is in, because you labeled the stages.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see how that kind of comes up. But the initial submission is this kind of green start. And then it goes to a user, some approver, who then will either approve it or deny it. If they cancel it, that's great. If they say revision needed, it goes back to the employee, who then will resubmit it, or they will cancel it. If it's resubmitted, it comes back to the user, the approver, who then will take further action again. So this is really a neat little workflow. It just simply allows you to do a logic branch, and then depending on whatever happens, either continue on or end or resubmit back to somebody else. So kind of a neat little logic flow here. We need to add all these, by the way. So these are this item here. This is a user task. You can usually tell because it's got a person icon next to it, as opposed to maybe just a task that is, as we can see here on the left-hand side, a save to repository task, an email task, or a workflow task. We also have sub-user tasks up here as well. So we have quite a few tasks. You can actually add any task and change it when you add that in. But for end users, it's kind of handy to have this because it's preset with all its settings. And notice here, the workflow, if it's approved, it can send to the repository because, like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to send a form into the Laserfiche repository. The form can just exist as an e-form in the form system, and nobody has to worry about it being in the repository. But if they do want it to be in there as a proof that something was done, this task would do it. And in fact, when you open up the properties by double-clicking on the task, it would say that you're connected to a particular repository. You need to make sure the name is correct and the server name is correct, and etc. So by default, some of these come with some settings that we as consultants would probably reconfigure on behalf of the client. But once it's all set up, you can save it in and even set the fields that are coming from the form to be pushed into fields that are on a that will be applied to the document as it's created in Laserfiche. So on this expense report, okay, I can't do that without setting my profile. Let's do that real quick. We'll set our name here. Close that message. Server is localhost. We'll do training. And let's do verify. Let's use an account that I know will work. There we go. So that's all configured. And the form will now need to be kind of reconfigured. And let's use a template that comes from Laserfiche now. So this is where forms actually, aside from the users, can now talk to Laserfiche, and it connects basically because of that profile to the admin console, and we can say, oh, okay, this is an expense report, so it's, I don't know, human resources. And then we can fill out a value that comes from the form. And our values are in the list here, as we see, field variables. So, you know, it's, well, let's use full name. That makes more sense. And we'll choose the name from the field. So from the field, it'll put name into the full name field that's coming into the document. So let's scroll down, click done, and there you go. And what's neat is when these forms are submitted to Laserfiche, you can choose to push them in as PDFs or TIFFs.
Sweet.
And you can even provide additional information like XML information or action history, etc. You can even pre-configure the default volume, put it in the path. Here's business process library, so that'll go into the database into this folder, and then expense reimbursements, and then by date. So let's go ahead and hit done on there. And who's our supervisor? Let's go look at that property. So the next person to get the approval will be a supervisor. And notice the initial submitter actually has that submit, well, the approver gets submit, approve, or reject. So in fact, the text would be, what does it say? Send back for revision, which, as we can see, would be that branch that comes back to the original submission person. But the approver is going to be, well, we have a team, and let's go say assign it to a user, and I'm going to assign it to the, I'll just start typing, forms account. We could use an email notification as well. Check the box, put a subject and a body in there. You can even provide additional information using tokens, as we can see here. The tokens, and whenever you see this little caret, sideways pointing caret, you can provide additional values coming from fields that were filled out on the form. All right, I'm not going to do that here. And there you go. Outflow just tells us that, you know, it's got a path to that gateway. These diamonds are gateways, as we can see over here on the left-hand side. They could be an exclusive gateway, an inclusive gateway, or a parallel gateway. They perform almost the same tasks, but have slightly different functionality in them. But that's outflows. Normally, you don't have to come in here unless you want to name it something special and make it default. But we'll click done on that. And then there's an email notification, which looks like it's sending to the initiator, who may or may not have an email address, but we'll skip that for now. And then at the very end, let's move over here. The end of the process is right here with this little termination icon. Okay. So at the end of the workflow, it stores it, it sends an email, and then finishes the whole process. And it's done. It will actually mark it as complete in that report that we saw earlier, if it gets to this point. If it gets stuck or hung up on one of these tasks, sometimes the repository is not available. And I get clients on occasion that say, hey, you know what, my workflow in my form, it's stuck, it's suspended. And we'll go in and look at that and look at some error messages, and lo and behold, the repository for some reason is not accessible by the form system. Once we fix that, then we can just unsuspend or push it on, and it goes, oh, I'm good, and it completes.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go ahead and hit save on those changes, and then we can do a quick demo of that. So that is kind of the basics of what the process diagram looks like. Let's go ahead and look at a few other items. Let's look at access rights. Who can use this form? So right now, the only account that can log in and see that form is the forms account. We should add, because I'm going to do a quick test, I'm going to add Bob. Now, Bob, notice we have some different items here. You can be a process admin, meaning you can come into this process and edit it. Or you're somebody who just interacts with the form, but they don't have any kind of admin rights whatsoever. They can see the form, fill it out, hit submit, or resubmit, or whatever, but that's it. Now, I'm going to make Bob a submitter, and I'm going to make forms a process admin on this form. So those get saved automatically, as we can see here. And then finally, let's look at the publishing options. This form has already been, actually, no, it's not been published. So Bob, if I were to log in as Bob, cannot see it. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to log out as my forms account, and I'm going to log in as Bob and make sure that I'm signing in with the correct password. And let's see what Bob can see. So theoretically, Bob should be able to see. He's a process admin. Now, he may not see everything because he's not been given access to every form that there is. So if we take a look, he is given access to quite a few, but as we can see here, here's the expense reimbursement. And if he wants to run it, let's click on Run. There, then his name is filled in automatically. We're defaulting. There we go. Oh, and okay, so the number, that's in the way there, but that was defaulting with that value. So we've got that running. So as we can see, he can do a submission on that. And because he's a process admin, he can edit the form, etc. So there you go.
Cool.
Now let's go back in there. Let's configure Bob a little bit better. Where's our forms account? There we go, forms. Okay, so we're back in his forms. Let's go look at our processes, which takes a little bit of time on my machine. It's usually really pretty quick and snappy for most end users. I don't normally expect to see this go so slow in this typical. So let's see, we want to go and edit the access rights. So let's go to Bob, and let's make Bob a submitter as well. Give me a moment here. Okay, so we've made Bob a submitter for this form, for the expense reimbursements. So if we go ahead and go back to that. Let's go ahead and just log back in as Bob here, and then take a look at, as far as expense reimbursements go, what can he do? All right, so on processes, now that he's not a process admin, he might be a process admin on other forms, but we should not see, well, we do see it. Can he edit the form? Okay, he can, which means, oh, he's an administrator. Okay, so notice from the drop-down there's that administration capability. So in this case, you can also configure the users to have certain rights. So Bob actually has one of 3 system-wide forms capabilities. He's obviously been configured as a system administrator. You could make them a person who can create processes. I'm already logged in as Bob, so I can't change myself. But you could also make them a basic user or a process creator, meaning you can kind of build the process initially, but not necessarily do much else. You could create a process and edit it, but you can't come in here and configure this sort of security. A system administrator is allowed to come in here and set system security. They're allowed to come in and edit data sources, which were those links to those databases. You have to have one in order to get it to work, so you have to create one, and a system administrator is the only one who can do that. And also, team management is something that a system administrator can do, where you can create a new team. I don't know what we want to call it. Let's call this and all right, so I'm going to do that. Make Bob the administrator. Whoops, let's go back to users. And team members would be at least Bob. And let's do Kyle as well. There we go. We don't need to create roles if we don't want, although it might be useful. But let's just go ahead and create the team. And now you have another team and a administrator. So the upside of teams is if you're in your tasks, you actually could be getting submitted applications as a member of the human resources team, and then any one of you on the team can grab that form and take action on it. So it's kind of like a bucket that you all pull from. Or you can set up the team system to do a round robin where it automatically gives you the next submitted application. The next one goes to the other person, and if there's only 2, it kind of goes back and forth, so it kind of evenly distributes the submitted forms to members of the team.
Okay.
So that's why teams exist. So now if we... So I can't show you, it's kind of a pain here with this. Let's go do it real quick if you don't mind. We'll get that set up. While it's doing that, let me just check something. And our forms training class is an hour, and we're almost at that hour. So we're almost done here. Anyway, just wanted to show you a few things more. Let's just get into administration. We'll change Bob. And let's make Bob just a basic user. All right. So now, at least for certain forms, Bob will show up with quite a bit less access, theoretically. If I've done all my security settings right, we can do this.
Yeah.
All right, so when we're logged in as Bob, let's see what processes we have that we can take a look at. All right, so there's a lot fewer items, and in fact, the expense report is not visible to Bob, even though it's been published and is out there. Actually, no, it's not published. He cannot come in and edit that process. So the last step is, as far as forms go, is to actually publish that form so that it's available to submitters and the public, depending on your situation.
Okay.
And that concludes Laserfiche forms training. Let's just take a quick look here. We'll go to the processes, publish that expense report. All right, so we'll go in here. We'll look at our publishing options. And a form, notice it gives us a link. So we can actually have this form, like we were mentioning, available to the public through a link. By default, it creates this the last 4 digit, this kind of weird name. So you might say, I want it to be called, whatever you want to call that actual URL. There's your URL. And on publishing, we can then hit publish to make it available for use by anybody else. And if you click on edit, let's see, I think, oh, there's the share button. So now you have a couple other options once it's published. You can, copy the URL. You can email the link as the URL link to somebody, or you can embed with this code the form in another web page.
Okay.
So that's pretty fun. So using that code, you can embed that into some other web page, and this form should show up inside that little frame that code provides. All right, so that is how we deal with forms. The only thing I wanted to really do was kind of submit a form as from to Bob so that we could see what Bob gets as a submitted form. But I think we've run out of time. I'd like to end this and go on to our next subject here. So let's stop recording, and then we'll go on to our next subject.